Hey, my name is Felipe and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build and deploy a machine learning model using AWS Sagemaker. And I'm also going to show you how to serve this model through an API using the AWS API Gateway and a Lambda function. So let's get started with this tutorial. And the first thing you should know regarding today's tutorial is that the different products and services we will be using from AWS, they may not be free, but you may need to pay for them. That's very important. We will be working on a SageMaker notebook, we will be creating a SageMaker endpoint, and we will be executing a Lambda function. And all of these products, they are not necessarily free, so you may need to pay for them. This is very important. But now let's get started with this tutorial. So let's go to SageMaker. I'm going to type SageMaker and I'm going to click here on Amazon SageMaker. Then I'm going to scroll all the way down and I'm going to this section over here, which is Notebook, and I'm going to click on Notebook Instances. I'm going to create notebook instance, and this is where we are going to create the notebook we are going to use in order to build and deploy our machine learning model in SageMaker. So the notebook instance name will be something like build and deploy model SageMaker tutorial. Okay, I'm going to choose an MLT2 medium, and then I'm going to this section over here. This is very important. I'm going to create a new role, and then I am going to create role, and that's pretty much all. Then the only thing we need to do is to create notebook instance. And that's pretty much all. So we have created our notebook, and the only thing we need to do is to wait until this notebook is completed, until this notebook is in service. Okay, this took a few minutes, but now it's ready, and I'm going to click here on Open Jupyter. Then I am going to new conda Python 3, and this is going to create a new Jupyter notebook. Okay, now let me show you the steps we will take in order to build and deploy this machine learning model. The first step in this process is the data preparation. Remember, if we are going to create a machine learning model, we definitely need data, and we definitely need to prepare this data. So the data preparation is definitely the first step in this process. Then we are going to move this data into an S3 bucket. This is going to be the second step in this process. Move data into S3 bucket. Then we are going to create the model. And when I say model, in this case, I mean the object we are going to use in order to train this machine learning model. We are going to create the Python object we are going to use in this process. Then we are going to train the model, and finally we are going to deploy it, right? So these are the 5 steps we will take in this process. And let me do something so it looks a little better. I'm going to create a title for each one of these steps. So this is the data preparation. Then okay, now it looks better, and I'm going to do is to delete this cell over here, and we can get started with this process. We can get started with the data preparation. So let me show you the data we will be using in this tutorial. Today we are going to work with the Iris dataset, which is a very popular dataset in machine learning. This is a very popular dataset, and also a very small dataset. It's comprised of only 150 objects, so it's very small. And let me show you the classes we are going to be classifying all the objects into. So we are going to be classifying absolutely every single object in this dataset into one of these 3 classes, into either Iris setosa, Iris versicolor, or Iris virginica. So we're going to be classifying flowers into one of these 3 categories. Now let me show you more details regarding this dataset. This dataset is comprised of 4 features, so we're going to use 4 features in order to classify data into one of these 3 categories. Let me show you the dataset. This is exactly how the data looks like, and you can see that for every single row we have 4 features, features, and then we have the label, which in this case is iris setosa, and if I scroll down, in this case we have another object which is iris versicolor, and if I scroll down, then we have all the objects which are labeled as iris virginica. So this is exactly the data we will be using today, and I invite you to take a much closer look to the data and to the features and to the classes and so on in this website, which I'm going to be posting in the description of this video. So for now, let's continue. Let's go back to this notebook and let's get started with this process. And the first thing we need to do in order to get started is to download this data. So this is how I'm going to do. I'm going to import a library which is url live.request, and then I'm going to download the data like this: url live.request.url retrieve, and then I'm going to paste the URL which we have over here. Copy link, and I'm going to name this file something like data.zip. Okay, I'm going to press enter, and the data has been downloaded into our notebook. You can see that this is the data we have downloaded. So absolutely every single file we are going to download is going to be over here, right, in this notebook instance. Now let's continue. Because I told you we are going to prepare the dataset, and in order to do all the data preparation, we are going to make some changes into this data, right? Let's move one step at a time. Let me show you all the steps we will need to take with this dataset. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is to unzip this file. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to create a new directory, which will be called something like data, and then I'm going to unzip the file doing something like this: unzip data zip and something like this. Okay, I'm going to press enter, and now we have extracted all the files from this zip file, and this is what we got, right? These are all the files we have just downloaded. Let me show you how this zip file looks like. Let me show you how all these files look like. So I'm going to download the data in my local computer too, so I can show you how it looks like. This is the zip file we have downloaded. These are all the files which are within the zip file. And this is the most important one, because this is the one which contains all the data we need in order to train this model. So basically all the data we need is within this file, which is called iris.data. So this is the data we are going to use, and now let's get started preparing this data. And let me show you how we're going to do. I'm going to create a new cell, and these are all the steps we are going to take in order to prepare this data set. We are going to read the data. Obviously, this is going to be the first step in this process. We are going to read the data. We're going to load the data into this notebook, and then we are going to convert to numerical values, because remember, some of the values in these files are not numerical. Some of the values are strings, right? You can see all the labels are actually strings, so we are going to convert everything into numerical values. Then we are going to shuffle the data. This is very, very, very important. If we do not shuffle the data, I already showed you the files, and we have all the objects of one of the categories, and then we have all the objects of the other category, and then we have all the objects of the remaining category. So if we do not shuffle the data, oh my God, this is going to be a big problem. So we are going to shuffle the data for sure. Then we are going to change the label column index. This is very important. This sounds a little weird, but I'm going to show you exactly what I mean with changing the label column index. And then finally, we are going to split all the data into a training set and a validation set. Okay, so these are exactly the steps we will take. This is going to be a very straightforward process, but it's much better if we write all the steps we are going to take in this process. The first thing we need to do is to import pandas as PD. Pandas is the library we are going to use, the Python library we are going to use in order to read this dataset. And then we are going to do something like this, PD read CSV, and the location in which we have downloaded this CSV, which is data, and then iris data. You can see that although the extension is .data, this is actually a CSV. If I show you over here, you can see that these are comma separated values. So although this is not the extension of this file, this is not a .csv, but this is a .data, it doesn't matter. We can read this file as if it were a CSV. And then we need to specify header none, because we do not have any headers on this CSV file. So this is about the first step in this process. Let me do something like this so it looks better. This was the we are reading the data. Now let's convert this data, this dataset, into numerical values. And in order to do so, let's go one step at a time. I'm going to print data. And you can see that these are all of the columns of this data, and the one we are going to make some edits, the one we are going to convert all the values into numerical values, is the column number 4. So this is how we're going to do. I'm going to say something like data 4. This is going to be data 4 dot replace. One of the categories is iris setosa. And we're going to replace this value with the number 0, right? Now let's do exactly the same for the other two categories. And then we're going to, the other one was something like iris virginica. And then the other one was iris versicolor. Okay, versicolor. This is going to be the category number 1, and this is going to be the category number 2. And that's pretty much all. So now let's print data again, and let's see how it looks like. Okay, now you can see that we have changed all the categories, all the class names from string into a numerical value. So it looks perfect. Now let's continue, and now we're going to shuffle the data. And then in order to shuffle the data, we are going to do something like this. Data is equal to data.sample. Then we're going to reset the index. And we are going to drop the new index which was generated. And that's pretty much all. So now I'm going to print data again. Let's move one step at a time. This is a very good practice to move one step at a time. And you can see that now the data looks much better. All the objects are no longer arranged by their category, but now everything is like completely shuffled, right? It's completely mixed together. All the categories, all the objects, everything is like perfect, exactly as we needed in order to build this machine learning model. Now let's do something which is very important. This is going to be a little weird. This is not very common when we are training a machine learning model, but this is required by the way SageMaker works and by the way the algorithm we are going to use in order to train this model, by the way it works, right? So this is what we need to do. We are going to change this column, which currently is in the position number 4, so this is at the end of our data. We are going to change the order. We're going to make this column to be the first column in this dataset. Let me show you exactly what we're going to do, and I'm going to show you how the data looks like after this change. Basically, this is very easy to do with pandas, and the only thing we're going to do is something like this. Basically, we are moving the column number 4 and we are setting this column as the first one in our data set, right? So that's very easy to do with pandas. And that's exactly what we need to do in order to make this change. Now let me show you how the data looks like. You can see that it's exactly the same data, but now this column is the first one in our data set. This, although it sounds a little weird and it looks a little weird, trust me, this is necessary in order to work on this tutorial, in order to train this model. And now let's move to the next step in this process, which is splitting the data into two different sets, the training set and the validation set. Let me show you. So this is going to be very straightforward. The only thing I'm going to do is to define a new variable, which is train data, and this is going to be data up to the index number 120. Because remember, in the dataset we are using, this dataset is comprised of 150 objects. So if we keep 80% of this data as training set, as training data, this means we need to access up to the index number 120, right? Let me write it over here. We are going to use 80% as training data and 20% as validation data. So this means we are going to use up to the index 120, and then this is going to be from the index 120 onwards, right? So this is exactly how we're going to do. Okay, and that's pretty much all. Now I'm going to execute this cell, and we have created the training set and the validation set we are going to use in order to train this model. We have completed the first step in this process, which is the data preparation. We're one step closer to reach our goal. So let's continue. Now we need to move all this data into an S3 bucket. So the first thing we need to do is to create a new S3 bucket, and I'm going to my AWS console, and I'm going to type S3, and I'm going to show you how to create a new bucket. So you need to click here on create bucket, and then the bucket name, this is very important. It needs to start with Sagemaker. So this is very important. Please mind that the first word in this bucket name needs to be necessarily Sagemaker, right? In my case, it's going to be something like Sagemaker build and deploy model Sagemaker. So this is the bucket I am going to create. Please remember, you need to start the bucket name with Sagemaker. This is very important. Now let's scroll all the way down, and I'm going to create this bucket. Okay, the bucket has been created, and I'm going to open this bucket over here. Okay, now let's go back to the notebook, and let's move the data into an S3 bucket, and this is a very important step in order to continue with this process. So I'm going to import both of three, and then I'm going to define a new variable, which is bucket name, and this is where I'm going to copy the bucket name, which is something like this. Then I am going to save the training data, to save this object into this directory over here, of our notebook instance. So I'm going to say something like train data to CSV, and I'm going to call this file as data.csv. The name is not really that important, so I'm just going to name it like data.csv. But something which is very important is to save this file without any headers and without any index. This is super important. Okay, now let's continue. Now I'm going to define a new variable, which is going to be the key, the object key, which is the name, the file name in which we are going to save this object into the S3 bucket. And the key will be something like data, train, and then data. This is exactly the location in which we are going to save the training data into the S3 bucket. So everything will be located on a directory which is called data, then another directory which is called train, and then the file is going to be called data. This is very important. Now let's continue. Now I'm going to define another variable, which is going to be the URL of this file in the S3 bucket, and this is going to be something like this: S3 something like this, and this is going to be the bucket name, and then the key, right? So this is going to be the URL of the object. Now let's continue, and now the only thing we need to do is to upload this file, and this is going to be something like this: boto3.session with a capital S, resource S3, okay, so this is exactly the way in which we are going to upload the data into the S3 bucket, right? So the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to execute this cell as it is, because let's see if it works, right? So I'm just going to execute it, and let's see if this instruction creates a new file in the S3 bucket. So we have already executed the cell, and if I go back to my S3 bucket and I refresh, you can see that now I have a new directory which is called data, and if I open data, I have another directory which is called train, and then within train is where I have this file which is called data, and this is exactly what we have specified over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste exactly the same instructions, and I'm just going to replace everything for the validation data. This is going to be the easiest way to do it. Okay, and everything else is the same, right? So we are saving the training data into an object which is data.csv, this object over here, and then we are uploading this object into the S3 bucket here. And this is exactly what we have over here, and everything is exactly the same but for the validation data, and this is exactly what we need to execute in order to move the validation data into the S3 bucket. Please mind that we are saving the data into a file which is called data.csv, and we are doing exactly the same for the validation data. So it doesn't really matter, because once we write this file, once we save this file, then we just take this file into the S3 bucket. So it doesn't really matter, we use exactly the same file name, right? Please mind this detail, because this is very, very, very important, and we are not really going to use this file at all in the future, right? So it doesn't really matter the way you name this file. But now we have completed the second step in this process. We're one step closer to train and deploy this model using Sagemaker. This is amazing. Now let's continue, and now it's time to create the model. And remember, when I say create model, I mean creating the object we are going to use in order to train this model. And this is how we are going to do. So I'm going to make an import which is Sagemaker, import Sagemaker. This is the library we are going to use in order to create this object, and I'm going to define a new variable which is xgb model, right? This is the object we are going to create, and this is the object we are going to use in order to train the machine learning model. So we're going to use an algorithm which is called XGBoost. This is the algorithm we are going to use in order to build this machine learning model. Now let's continue. We need to call Sagemaker.estimator with a capital E. And we are going to say something like this. We're going to input many parameters. The first one is the algorithm we are going to use. And in order to do so, we need to create a new container, right? There are many algorithms we can choose from when we build a machine learning model using Sagemaker, many algorithms, and the way you are going to create all of these algorithms is by creating a new container. So we are going to make a new import, which is something like from Sagemaker.amazon estimator import get image URI. Okay, and now in order to create this container, we are going to say something like this: get image URI we are going to input the session and then the region name, and we need to specify exactly what's the image we are going to use in order to create this container. And this is the image we're going to use, XG boost, right? Because remember, we are going to use this algorithm in order to build this machine learning model, which is called XGBoost. And remember, there are many algorithms we can choose from. And maybe in a future tutorial, I can show you all the different options you have in order to build a machine learning model using SageMaker. But for now, let's keep it simple. And this is the one I'm going to use, XGBoost. Then this is very important. We need to get the access role, the execution role for this instance. This is very important, and obviously we need to make a new import from SageMaker, import get execution role. This is very important. Remember that SageMaker is going to train a model, is going to train an XGBoost model, and in order to do so, we need to specify exactly what's the execution role AWS is going to use in order to make this training process, in order to do everything that's related to this training process. Now we need to specify how many instances are we going to use in order to train the model. And we are going to use only one, so I'm going to say train instance count equal to 1. Then let's continue. We need to specify what's the instance type AWS is going to use in order to make this training process. And the instance type will be an ML M4 extra large instance. Then about we need to specify the size, the storage size, the volume size of this instance, and this is going to be something like train volume size equal to 5 gigabytes. Then, this is very important, where are we going to save the machine learning model? Where are we going to save this object? This is very important. What's the location into in the S3 bucket in which we are going to save this object? And in order to do so, I'm going to define a new variable over here, which is going to be something like S3 output location. And this is going to be very similar to this one over here. But in this case, the bucket name is going to be exactly the same, so I'm not going to redefine this variable. But the key in this case will be something like model and then XGB model, something like that. So this is where we're going to save the model we are going to train. And that's pretty much all. So the only thing I'm going to do is to paste it over here. Let's continue. And now the last argument will be something like SageMaker session. Okay, so that's pretty much all. So this is how we're going to create the object, the Python object we are going to use in order to train this model. In the next step, the only thing we're going to do is to take this object and to train it, right? But the first thing we need to do is to define it, and this is exactly how we're going to do. And something else we need to do before we continue is to specify all the hyperparameters we are going to use in this training process. Remember, every time we train a machine learning model, we are using many hyperparameters, and in this case, it's not the exception. So let's just set a few hyperparameters. This is how I'm going to do. I'm just going to write all these parameters and I'm going to explain some of them at the end. Okay, so these are all the hyperparameters we are going to use in order to train this model, and let me explain these two: number of classes and number of rounds. Number of classes is how many classes are there in our dataset, and remember we are using 3 different classes, so we are going to set this value in 3. Then number of rounds, this is very similar to the number of epochs in which are usually used in machine learning when we are training a machine learning model. Remember, the number of epochs is how many times are we going to iterate in all of our training data, and this is exactly what this means. How many rounds are we going to take with our data? This is very similar to the number of epochs. And then I have also specified these hyperparameters. And if you want a more comprehensive description of all the hyperparameters you can choose with XGBoost and all the different options you have for all of these hyperparameters, then I invite you to take a look at this website over here, which explains exactly what are all the hyperparameters you can choose and their meaning and their values and so on, right? This is the AWS official documentation for the XGBoost model. So I'm going to be posting this link, this website, in the description of this video, so you can just knock yourself out learning all the hyperparameters you can choose from in XGBoost. But for now, let's continue. The only thing I'm going to do now is to press enter, and I'm going to create this object. And it seems I have a typo over here. This is estimator. I had a typo, and now if I press enter again, you can see everything seems to be just fine. So we have completed this step in this process, and now we are one step closer to train and deploy our machine learning model using Sagemaker. So let's continue. Now it's the most interesting part in this process, which is the training. This is where we're going to train this model. So let's see how we can do that. This is going to be very straightforward. The only thing we're going to do is to take the data we have saved into the S3 bucket, and we are going to say something like this. We are going to specify the URL for the training data, for the validation data. And this is going to be something like, maybe I can just paste this value over here, which is the URL, and I can make some edits. This is the bucket name, format bucket name, and then this location, which was something like data train. And then in order to do the same for the validation data, we need to do something like this. Okay, and this is val data. Okay, so please mind that I'm not really specifying the location, the actual location of the file, but I'm just referring to this directory over here, train and val. Now let's continue. And now I'm going to define 2 new variables, which are train channel and val channel. And train channel will be something like sagemaker.session.s3 input, because remember, all of the data is saved in an S3 bucket, and then this will be train data, which is location of the data, and then the content type, and this is very important. And in this case, the data was saved as CSV, so we need to say something like this: text CSV. Now let's continue, and the only thing I'm going to do is to copy and paste this sentence over here. Okay, and I'm going to change it as val date. Okay, and now let's continue. I'm going to create a dictionary which is called data channels, and data channels will be something like train channel, and then validation val channel. And that's pretty much all. So we have created this dictionary, which is very important. You can see it has only 2 keys, and the content of this dictionary is all the training data and all the validation data. And now the only thing we need to do is to call this object we have created in the previous step, to call XGB model.fit. And that's pretty much all. That's pretty much all it takes in order to train this model, and obviously to input the data. And I'm going to input this variable, this new object I have just created, data channels. And that's pretty much all. The only thing I'm going to do now is to press enter, and this is going to take care of all the training process. That's amazing. So the only thing we need to do now is to wait a few minutes until this training is completed. Okay, I see I have an error, and if I scroll up, okay, so this is not object, but this is objective. And I see now that I have another typo over here. This is the number of rounds, so this is an N. Okay, now let's see again. I'm going to execute this cell again. Okay, now the training process is completed and everything seems to be just fine, and now it's time to deploy the model. Now it's the last step in this process, and this is where we are going to take the model we trained and we are going to deploy it in using a SageMaker. So this is how we're going to do. I'm going to define a new variable which is XGB predictor, and this will be the same variable XGB model. And we are going to call deploy, and we are going to input the initial instance count. This is how many instances are we going to use in order to deploy this model, and we're going to set this value in 1. And then I'm also going to define instance type, which is the instance type we are going to use in order to deploy this model in order to make predictions. And this is ml.m4.xlarge. And that's pretty much all. The only thing I'm going to do now is to press enter, and that's it. Now let's see what happens. Okay, so the execution is now completed and we didn't have any errors, so everything seems to be just fine. Now let me show you. If I go back to SageMaker and I scroll down and I click here on inference, and then I click on endpoints, this is the endpoint we have just created. This is the machine learning model we have deployed using SageMaker. So we are ready. We have completed this process. Now the only thing I'm going to do is to show you how to make predictions using this endpoint. And in order to do so, I'm going to create an API using the AWS API gateway and a Lambda function. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to type Lambda and I'm going to select this option. Then I'm going to click here on create function, and I'm going to name this function something like inference SageMaker Lambda function. Okay, then runtime, I'm going to select Python 3.11, and I'm going to leave the default execution role. We are going to change this role later on, but for now let's just leave the default basic execution role. I'm going to click on create function. Okay, the Lambda function has been created, and now let me show you how to make predictions using the SageMaker endpoint we created a few minutes ago. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import Bodo3, and then let me show you how to make predictions. I'm going to create a new client, which is bodo3.client runtime.sagemaker, and I'm going to call this object, I'm going to create a new variable which is runtime client. Okay, then I'm going to define a new variable which is endpoint name, and this is going to be the name of the endpoint we have just created. So I'm going back to SageMaker and let's copy and paste the endpoint name. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to click here on inference, then endpoints. I'm going to copy this value and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, now I'm going to define another variable which is sample, and this is the data sample we are going to use in order to make predictions, right? This is the data we are going to input into the SageMaker endpoint, and this is the data we are going to use in order to make predictions. So let's do something. I'm going back to the SageMaker notebook we created, and I'm going to click on data, iris data, and I'm just going to copy and paste one of the values in this file. I'm just going to copy the first value over here, and I'm going to paste it over here on sample. Okay, let's do something else. I'm going to increase the font size, and that's pretty much all. Okay, so this is the sample we are going to use in order to make predictions. And now let's call the API endpoint. Let's call the SageMaker endpoint. I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to use runtime client.invoke endpoint, and I'm going to input 3 different arguments. The first one is endpoint name, which will be the endpoint name we have just created. Then the content type, this will be text CSV. And then I am going to input the data we are going to use in order to make predictions, which is sample, and this is a capital B. Okay, and this is going to be response. That's pretty much all. And now the only thing we need to do is to take the response. It's going to parse the response. So this is how I am going to do. I'm going to define another variable, which is result, and result will be something like response body read the code, and I'm going to decode it using ASCII. Okay, something like that. Okay, let's move one step at a time. I'm going to print result and let's see what happens. But before we execute this function, we need to do something first. Let's go to configuration. Actually, we need to do 2 things first. One of them is to change the default timeout, which is 3 seconds. I'm going to put something like 1 minute. This is going to be more than enough in order to execute our Lambda function. And now let's go to permissions and let's change this execution role. So I'm going to AAM and I'm going to create a new execution role. I'm going to click on roles, create role, AWS service, this is going to be Lambda, next, and I'm going to choose 2 policies. One of them is basic Lambda execution role, and then SageMaker full access, Amazon SageMaker full access. Next, and this is going to be something like basic Lambda SageMaker full access execution role. I'm going to scroll all the way down and I'm going to create role. The role has been created, so let's get back to the Lambda function, and the only thing I'm going to do now is to click on edit, scroll all the way down, and I am going to find the role we have just created, which was something like basic Lambda SageMaker full access execution role, and click on save. So this is pretty much all we need to do. I'm going to get back to code, click on deploy, and let's see if it works. Let's see if we can execute this Lambda function, and let's see if everything works as expected. So I'm going to click on test, define a new test event, save. Okay, and we got this output. Let me make this a little larger. We got this output, which is 0, and 0 is exactly the value we should get. Remember, we replaced Iris Setosa by the value 0, by the number 0, so everything is okay, everything is working as expected. Let's do another test. I'm going to input this value, and I should be getting a number 2 because we replaced this value by the number 2. I'm going to click on deploy, and then I'm going to click on test. I mean, we replaced this value, the label, by the number 2, so we should be getting a number 2. So everything is working perfect. And you can see that we are getting a float, right? We are getting 2.0, which is a float. And I'm not completely sure if it's actually a float or if it's a string. So what I'm going to do is convert this value to float. And then I am going to convert it into an integer. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to return this value something like this. I'm going to create a dictionary with only one key, which is prediction. And this is going to be result. Okay, let's see if it works. I'm going to click on deploy, and then I'm going to click on test. Okay, everything seems to be working just fine. This is the response we got. So we are ready to continue. Now it's time to create the API we are going to use in order to call this Lambda function. And I'm going to API gateway. And this is going to be very straightforward. Create API, REST API. I'm going to call this API something like build and deploy Sagemaker model tutorial API. Okay, and create API. I'm going to create a new method. This is going to be a post method. Click here on Lambda function, which is the default value, and I'm going to copy and paste the name of the Lambda function we created. So I'm going to get back to Lambda. I'm going to copy and paste this value. Let's see if this is the Lambda function I have just created. Yeah. So I'm going to paste this value here, and I'm going to select this option, which is use Lambda for proxy integration, and I'm going to click on save. Okay. Okay, then I'm going to click on actions, deploy API, development stage. I'm going to deployment stage. I'm going to create a new stage, and the name will be something like dev, deploy. Okay, now let's go back here, resources, post. Let's test this Lambda function. Let's test this API. Let's see if it works. And I am just going to execute it like this with an empty body. So we should be executing exactly the same Lambda function, exactly the same code as it is here. And we should be getting exactly the same response as we got when we executed the Lambda function here, right? And you can see that we're getting prediction 2. So everything seems to be working just fine. Now let's make some changes, because obviously we want to input this sample, we want to input this value here into the Lambda function. So this is how we are going to do. I'm going to create a string with 4 values, and I'm going to input these values from this object, which is called event. And these values will be within the key, which is called body. And then this is going to be a dictionary, so I am going to access, for each one of these values, I'm going to access a different key. So this is going to be something like x1. This is going to make sense in a couple of minutes, so just bear with me. Something like this, x2, x3, x4, right? Remember, we need to input 4 different features, and this is how the features will be called within this dictionary. And something which is very important, this is a dictionary, event body is a dictionary, but we are going to take this value as a string. So we need to convert this value from string to a Python dictionary. And this is how we're going to do. I'm going to make another import, which is AST. And then we're going to call AST literal eval, and that's pretty much all. And obviously I'm going to do the same for all the other values. Okay, something like that. This is going to work just fine. So I'm going to click on deploy. And now let's get back to the API gateway, and let's do something like this. I'm going to create this value. I'm going to create the body we are going to use in order to call this Lambda function. And this is where we are going to create the 4 keys, x1, x2, x3, and x4. Okay. And let's see if it works. Now I'm going to get back here to data, to iris data, and I'm just going to select a random value, for example this one, the same one we used a couple of minutes ago, and I'm going to do something like this. So x1 will be 7.0, then x2 will be 3.2, and then the next one will be 4.7, and x4 will be 1.4. And let's see if it works. I'm going to click on test. And we got an error. Let's see why. Okay, I think I know what's the problem. Let's get back to the Lambda function, and everything is okay, but this is not a capital B. So I'm just going to replace this value. I'm going to write body, but without a capital B. Let's see now what happens. I'm going to click on deploy. And now let's get back to the API gateway, and I'm going to click on test again. Okay, and now we got prediction 2, so everything seems to be working just fine. And that's pretty much all. The API has been created, everything is ready. The only thing I'm going to do now is let's test this API from outside the AWS environment, right? Let's just go to Postman and let's see if the API is working as expected. So let's go to Postman. I'm going to my workspace. I'm going to click on this plus button over here, and I'm going to create a new blank collection. And the name will be something like build and deploy model SageMaker API test. Okay, and then let's create a new method. Add request. This is going to be a post method. And let's copy and paste the URL of this API, which is located somewhere around here. Copy. And then paste here. Okay. And then let's input the body. I'm just going to copy and paste the same body we wrote over here. Or maybe I can just write it again from scratch. Something like this. This is something like x1, x2, x3, x4. Okay. And I'm just going to copy and paste the same values we used before. Okay, and let's see what happens. I'm going to click on send. And we got prediction 2. So everything seems to be working just fine. And that's going to be pretty much all for this tutorial. This is exactly how you can build and deploy your own machine learning model using SageMaker, and how you can serve this model through an API using API Gateway and a Lambda function. This is going to be all for today. My name is Felipe, I'm a computer vision engineer, and see you on my next video.